o'clock on my dot. Let's go.
All
right.
I'm Derek. This is Carissa. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about transportation of students and athletes, just kind of what that looks like and kind of what that can mean for us.
Your handout, if you look at it real quick,
it's really just a simplified form of our PowerPoint. There's a lot of slides that you probably don't have that we'll go through, but there are blanks in the PowerPoint that we gave you. So that kind of help you go along and fill that out as we go through it. And then if you have any questions along the way, you can ask, but it should be pretty simple to figure out.
How do we work? Touch the board with it.
Got it.
Different modes of transportation that you would use as a teacher or a coach, and when you would use that transportation. So go ahead and partner up. We'll give you 2 minutes to go ahead and think of the different modes of transportation that you could move students with, and when you would do that. Take this. You can just write it on the back. And don't use your worksheets to figure out the different modes. Because they're on there.
Anything that's eight of a move, Christine's naming. A lawnmower. Snowshoes.
And don't forget to think about when you would use it once you figured out what modes of transportation there are. Yes, our reference, because they went on field trips.
Is this the mode of transportation we were driving?
What's that?
Is this the mode of transportation that you were driving?
Either one you're driving or anything that you can use to transport kids, whether you're driving.
Yeah, it has to be students, not just yourself. All right, we'll do 30 more seconds. Alrighty, let me go ahead and get a group to go ahead and volunteer 2 modes of transportation that they thought of.
A plane.
A plane. Plane could be one for transportation. What else?
Yeah.
They normally have to be driving the student?
Yes, I can fly a plane.
I mean, not that you can fly a plane, but if you have to take students onto a plane. Because sometimes they will take long trips, especially if you're with like a team, like speech and debate. What else are some modes of transportation? Golf cart. Bus, that's a good one. Golf cart, technically, yes. Did you have one?
I was going to say a van or privately owned vehicle or a car.
Yep, so van or a privately owned vehicle.
A bicycle belt for 2.
Tandem bike, I'll go ahead and give you some credit for that. All right, when would you use transportation as a teacher or coach? Or taking a to a game? Or
Taking someone home.
taking someone home, that's chancy.
During practice, just transporting if somebody gets hurt, taking them up to the school or anything like that.
It's true, what else?
Taking to the doctor. Field trip.
Maybe taking them to a doctor. We won't really touch on that much in this presentation.
Oh, yeah.
She said field trip.
Field trip, yep, definitely you'll use transportation for that. Did you have a question?
Are we just referring to like high school? Or
No, it could be elementary school, middle school, pretty much anywhere where you're taking.
Not really college though.
College as well.
Okay.
Oh,
So that's when using a plane would actually be an actual mode of transportation because people in schools do travel a lot that way.
All right, and we'll just give you, there's lots of different ways you can handle transportation with your school. And kind of, the Eugene School District actually has a very good model to use if in the future you're thinking about or you're having to coordinate transportation for kids. Their setup is pretty good. As it says, anybody who's going to drive a van
These are actually like the small 15-passenger vans, something like that, not necessarily just for the buses. But anybody who drives just a small van that's going to be carrying students or athletes, you have to go through a van certification, which everyone has to be first aid CPR certified, and you have to go through a 2-hour-long class that just covers the characteristics of the vehicles that you'll be driving, the operation of the vehicles as far as what things you have to check for before you drive, how everything works. Also, emergency procedures if there was an accident or something going on the van, and then also just driver expectations, which could range from just how this, like how you consume alcohol, as far as if you have a certain time limit, after you use alcohol before you're allowed to drive, stuff like that. And then also it covers just the time on duty, because Eugene School District has a setup where someone can only be working a certain amount of time and be able to drive a van with passengers. So if you worked a 12-hour day, you only have so much time you can be on duty and still be able to drive. So if your time limit was 12 hours and you worked for 10 hours, you're only allowed to drive for 2. Once you get that 12-hour mark, you're no longer allowed to be driving with passengers in the van. And it also has a point deduction system on your license, which takes into account any accidents, any tickets or anything you get will chip away at the points that you have. And then as you lose those points, you can become ineligible to be a driver in their system.
So with that in mind, the Eugene School District is in Oregon. So throughout our presentation, we'll play a game called the Oregon Trail. In front of you guys is you have your different licenses with 3 pieces of candy. Your candy represents the points that you have on your license. Every time we go through a case, we're going to pull 2 numbers. So if your license number matches up with the numbers we pull, you have to give us one of your pieces of candy. So there's numbers 1 through 12. Everybody has a driver's license number, so make sure you know. Now this will come back to us at the very end when we play our final game. Okay? So make sure you guys are paying attention.
I don't like this game.
All right, and so we covered just ways to transport athletes and students. And so we mentioned some. So just before we're really going to talk about is just an independent contractor. That could be anything from a charter bus, going on a long road trip for playoffs. Could be a plane, as Laura mentioned. I think that would fit in that category. The next would be just school vehicles driven by a licensed district employee, which is going to be your bus. And every now and then, like a van may fit into that. Also, a lot of times vans could be driven by teachers or coaches and not necessarily by just a driver. And you have employee vehicles, which is just if I was going to jump in my car and carry some kids on a short field trip, something like that. And then a private vehicle driven by volunteers, it's a student in your class, their mother is going to drive their minivan on the field trip. That would be a situation where that would fit in. As far as liability issues, you're least likely to be liable for any accidents if you fall into the first category, the employment of independent contractors. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then also it just kind of varies all the way down to a private vehicle driven by volunteers where you're going to be with the most liability on your shoulders.
Yeah, the way we created this list, the least liabilities at the top and the greatest liabilities at the bottom. So it's kind of like a grading right now. So the first one we're going to talk about is independent contractors. So when you go and hire an independent contractor, like if you get a charter bus, then that liability transfers to the company that you just outsourced to. So the independent contractors take on that liability. However, the duty to care is still existing between you and whoever's on the bus. So that doesn't transfer over. So like if someone's choking on the bus, that duty of care is still there for you to respond. But this is relative to the selection and the retention of the contractor. And there are certain things that you can still check to make sure for your independent contractor. You still want to make sure that they still have their licensing and certification. Because these are problems where foreseeability could be an issue. So like if you hired an independent contractor, but you knew that they didn't keep up with their licensing and certification, that could be a problem coming back on you. Make sure that they do have liability insurance, and then go ahead and check the past history of the company. If they're known to be, have speeding tickets or accidents, those are things you should know going into it.
Now we're going to cover a few quick cases just about independent contractors and kind of how that fleshes itself out. So our first one is just Lofty versus the joint school district number 2 in Cumberland, in Wisconsin. And so the school basketball team's going on a away trip just to another city. So they get a charter bus. They're carrying the kids. There's a multi-car accident and caused by the driver of the charter bus, which left a woman and her husband in the accident. It killed her husband, and then the plaintiff brings suit against the school district, saying that they were liable for the damages and also just for the death of her husband. And the courts ruled that the district cannot be held liable for the actions of the independent contractor. And so once they hire the independent contractor, the liability shifts onto their shoulders. And so that's why we said before that you're least liable with a situation like that. But what, if you are going to hire a charter company, either a bus, plane, something like that, we mentioned it briefly, what do you think you would still be liable for in that situation?
Any injuries or anything that happened to the kids on the bus?
Potentially, yeah.
The medical attention, like immediacy and all that stuff.
Yeah. And we'll get into a little bit more of that when there is a driver and then multiple adults on the bus as well. We'll get into that more a little bit later. Then also when you're looking at, like Chris said, if you're looking at hiring a charter company, you want to hire somebody with a good reputation that keeps up with their license, keeps up with their insurance and stuff like that. You don't want to get Bose Bus Barn, because they're cheap and just you have no idea what their drivers are even licensed, but they're just going to haul your kids around. So you want to make sure that you're picking a good company, and then you're also not employing them to do something inherently dangerous. And so that'll cover that one.
So we'll have our first point deduction for our drivers.
We got number 10. Who's number 10? Sorry.
I'll take that reason.
Go ahead and peel it off.
Sorry. And number 12.
We're clear on that one.
I got number 12.
Number 12, all right, go ahead and peel off.
Deduction.
So can I choose which one I pulled
Yeah.
off?
Yep, you can choose whichever one you don't want.
Candy's going to me.
I got
I always say everybody's candy.
I'll take
All right. Bring it on back in. Our next case is just McKee versus the Southeast Delco School District. Here, a 6-year-old Cheryl Ann is riding in a school van that's owned and operated by a private company. So this isn't a van owned by the school or driven by a school employee. The driver did not require the little girl to wear a seatbelt, and he had to brake quickly to avoid a collision with another car. She's thrown out of her seat, hits the console of the van, and then received mouth and jaw injuries. So the parents bring the suit against the driver and the charter company, saying that they were liable because they were negligent in not making their daughter wear the seatbelt. The jury actually found for the defendant in this case, so they sided with the school district and with the companies that they employed. But the case set aside the verdict because there's some complications in a lot of cases. Wearing a seatbelt or not wearing a seatbelt, that choice is sometimes shown to be contributing negligence in a case of an accident. But in this case, with being a younger person, being 6 years old, and not necessarily being able to make that kind of decision. And then also they found out that the driver was actually instructed to restrain the children that he was driving, and he was also instructed on how to do that properly, and he just chose not to do that. And so the appeal was ultimately denied for the new trial. So they ordered for a new trial. We're going to go back to trial saying that, and I guess the issue with this case would be, did the driver have the duty to restrain the children in this case? And so that's what they got to, and obviously they settled out of court for that one. We don't really know what happened after that. But, and so it just kind of shows that liability was there to restrain the children, even though it wasn't necessarily always on there.
That's pull your 2.
10 again.
What?
And number 4.
Here, man, driver.
Kate B. Castro. This is in 2012, so this is this year. A youth soccer team is away for a tournament, and they take a field trip to go whitewater rafting while they have some downtime. The bus was involved in a collision. This is actually a vehicle that the team rented and then took with them, and then the insurance company, when they went to claim to cover damages and all that stuff, the insurance company denied the coverage because they were saying the bus that they rented was to be used to transport the athletes from their city to the tournament and for tournament purposes only, and they actually voided their insurance coverage by taking them on a field trip somewhere else. So that's just something to keep in mind. Even when you rent a bus or you charter a bus or anything like that, make sure that you know what you're covered for. This group, they took a little field trip just to, people do that a lot on these big tournaments and stuff. Take a little downtime to go enjoy themselves, and then they had the accident and they weren't covered, and so they were left to foot that bill. So, number one. And
that's a 9.
That's a 9.
My 6 have a curly tail on them. That's how you know. I should have drawn a line.
Alright, so next we'll get into district vehicles. So this could be your buses, your big fleet of buses, or the vans that are kept at schools. The fact is that buses are the best maintained vehicles in a district fleet. They come in and out of the garage every day. Somebody's always checking them. They're always keeping up with how they're maintained. Somebody's always looking at them. And the vans are actually going to be your least maintained vehicles in a district fleet because they're usually used just by coaches or teachers. They sit in the parking lot for no telling how long before they're between uses. And so they're often not checked or not kept up with. Nobody really keeps a running record of how they've been maintained. They've had tire rotation, stuff like that. And so, and actually each state's going to have their own checklist of what particularly these vehicles have to be checked out before they're used. And this link is just to actually Georgia's rules about bus inspection before that, what a driver has to go through every day before they look at the bus or before they drive the bus. We're not really going to go through it right now, but if you want to write it down or get it from us later, you can do that. It may be on your handout.
It is.
So y'all can check that
no,
if you're just interested.
And then one other thing, the vans are usually maintained by the coaches and teachers that look at them. So that's another issue, but we'll actually see that affect us more when we get into the court cases. When I was practicing this, when I was saying it at home, and I kept saying Clementine versus Griffin, so if I do that, just let it go. I know it's Clement, but it just comes out that way. So this one, it's 10 members of a baseball team at a junior college actually filed suit against the community college, Ford Motor Company, Goodyear Tire Company, and the student driver for a collision that happened. It was following a blowout. There were 13 members of the team in the van, one of which was the student coach who was driving, and then 12 were obviously playing on the team, but 2 of the teammates didn't want to sue, so it was only 10 of them that sued. So in trial court, the plaintiffs claim that excuse me, that the school was negligent in the maintenance of the vehicle. We'll get into the reasons why, because there's actually a lot of reasons why they claim that first one. And then Goodyear Tire Company was liable for the tires that were used. Ford Motor Company was liable for using the Goodyear tires that were used. And then the driver was charged with negligence for the operation of the van. And remember, in lawsuits like this, usually they'll kind of use the whole shotgun theory. We're going to sue everybody and see what actually holds. So just keep that in mind while we're going through this. So the reason why they sued the college for lack of maintenance on the vehicle was that the vehicle had over 24,000 miles on it, but not one single tire rotation. Also, the tires were underinflated by regards to the manufacturer's standard. So for all tires, they have to have a certain PSI of air that's supposed to be in each tire. These tires were underinflated, which eventually caused the blowout of the tire, which caused the single car accident. Now, the thing was, the driver knew the tires were underinflated. They didn't have any time to do anything about it. Also, in some states, they require you to have an additional license to use these vans. And in the state of the state of Louisiana, you have to have what's called a chauffeur's license. So your driver's license is just your regular, and then you have to take an additional test to get your chauffeur's license. And this driver did not have that. He only had his regular driver's license. Also, the driver had no formal training in how to drive a van. And in many of these cases, they'll get in depth about how driving a van is different than driving a car, especially if you have like a sedan or like a smaller vehicle. Like I drive a Corolla. There's no way that's going to match up to a van with all the weight and the equipment. Then also, the driver may or may not have been speeding. That's something that they said he was doing at the time, but it wasn't proven by anybody. So in trial court, they found for the plaintiffs, only 2 of them actually stuck. So they found that 60% of the fault was on Goodyear, and that 40% of the fault was on the school. And then all the actions against the driver were dismissed because they said that it was the school's fault that he hadn't gotten his chauffeur's license or the proper training. That was part of the maintenance of the vehicle. And then Ford, they dismissed that too. But the plaintiffs were awarded $3.7 million. Okay, and this is back in 1994, so it's a good amount of money. So then the plaintiffs appealed. And when they did that, the appellate court upheld the lower court's finding on the college. But what I wanted to talk about were the duties that the college actually breached. So these were the breaches of duty and the charges that were against them. Negligence to train the driver, so they were liable for the driver's actions, which is why his charges were dropped. They had the duty to maintain the vehicle, which they obviously did not. Usually rotating your tires is something that you would do. Does anybody know the mileage? Usually it's under like the manufacturers. Yeah, it's like 3 to 5. So that was a problem. Then they had the duty to ensure the driver had a proper license, and they didn't do that. So the only part of the ruling that were overturned was that the damages were really excessive, so they lessened the damages to $3.3 million. I know. 3.7 to 3.3, so.
Big swing.
I know. So this next one is Adams versus Klein.
Wait a minute.
Oop, that's right. Go ahead and draw 2. My bad.
Number 3.
Ooh.
Lost your point. And
Number 3 again.
Oh!
sorry.
This is the hardest decision in a row. Just go ahead and eat it.
just the wrapper back.
Just hand it the wrapper back.
All right. So Adams versus Klein. This is another case with the van. The plaintiff was injured during a 2-van convoy where the back van rear-ended the front van. Now the coach was in the lead van, and he had to stop suddenly because there was a change in the light. And the plaintiff, who was driving, attempted to stop, but it was so much weight in the car because he had more passengers and he had more equipment, and so they rear-ended the front. So in this suit, they claimed a whole lot of negligence on the school. So these were the things that the plaintiff alleged against the coach. There's 6 of them. So he failed to inspect and therefore discovered defective brakes, because that was one of the claims that the plaintiff, who was actually driving, said, that the brakes were bad. Second, the van was overloaded. It had way too many passengers for seatbelts, and that's actually going to be an ongoing theme, so just remember you don't want to ever overload your vehicle. All right? 3, the coach failed to determine whether or not the student was a competent driver to go ahead and drive. 4, he failed to instruct the plaintiff on correct operation of the van. 5, he failed to determine whether or not the plaintiff had a valid driver's license or chauffeur's license. And 6, he failed to determine whether or not he met the 21-year age driving requirement to drive the bus, or the van, excuse me. So the defendant moved for summary judgment, but was denied. So then they appealed. And then the appellate court decided that they didn't have enough evidence, the plaintiffs didn't have enough evidence to prove that the brakes were defective, that the university coach failed to determine the competency of the driver, that the university failed to determine the licenses that the plaintiff possessed, and then that the university or the coach failed to give the plaintiff any type of driving instructions. So on those allegations, summary judgment was awarded. So for those ones. However, remember there were 6. So the one thing that summary judgment wasn't awarded to was overloading the van. And as you can see, that one's really overloaded. So go ahead and pull 2.
Number 1. And number 12.
Oh.
Man. Hitting them hard. All right. Next, we've got Brown versus the Egan Consolidated School District. It was a cold, wintry day. Blizzard-like weather. There was blowing snow, poor visibility, icy roads. And then the school bus driver stopped his bus in the middle of the road, parked it, didn't turn on any emergency lights, no brake lights, no warning signs whatsoever. And then this lady, Elaine Brown, collided with the back of the bus. She actually suffered a severed aorta, broken leg, broken hip, and then other injuries that they didn't name.
But deemed serious.
Yeah. She brought, definitely brought a case against the school district. The summary judgment was denied in this case because, the school district is sometimes covered under immunity, but in this case, by purchasing liability insurance for the school buses, they actually waived their immunity in that case. So the decision was for the plaintiff to the maximum, value that their insurance would cover, which I think in this case was $450,000, something like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Even in a case when a school district would be immune to a suit, when there is liability insurance, when it's required by law, you have to purchase liability insurance. You waive that immunity in those cases.
Go ahead and just pull 1.
We'll just pull 1. Number 11.
Oh. You're doing so well.
Everyone gets deducted points.
All right, our next one is Raleigh versus Burke County. In this case, driver, for whatever reason, arranged to have a substitute driver for that day. Administration, superintendent, nobody said anything about it. They were like, it's fine. They paid the regular driver his fee, his normal salary. They compensated the substitute. And then while they were driving, the driver swerved to miss a pothole. And then a student, when he swerved, fell, hit his eye on the seat, and was injured. They actually decided for the plaintiff in this court, saying that the court was just saying that the school board is bound to exercise extraordinary due diligence when transporting students, and saying that having a substitute driver in the place of the other one is, I guess he was not as qualified as the regular driver, and therefore they were found liable for that because they did, just not having their normal qualified driver. So. Number 3. Who's that? Oh. Sorry, Christy.
Is she all standing? Everybody's putting their time just to keep it unfair.
We'll kind of transition to our next kind of vehicles. These are just employee vehicles. This is a coach or a teacher driving their own car, carrying students around. Using your own vehicle in this case significantly increases the chance, your liability for passengers. The owner and driver of the car is in charge of the maintenance of the vehicle, which then leads you to be liable in many circumstances. So that just means, if there's something wrong with your car and it's because you're not maintaining it very well, you could be liable for any action that may cause. I know for me, I don't always take the best care of my car. And, there are times when, I need new tires and, don't replace it for a while just for whatever reason. If I was to have a wreck because I had a blow up because I had a bad tire, that would leave me liable in those situations. So that's kind of what that would look like. And so you just also have to make sure that you have good insurance if you're going to do that. You want to make sure that your insurance policy includes personal injury protection, which most states I think require you to have some form of personal injury protection, which just compensates anybody that is injured while you are driving in the vehicle. And so it's also important that you never take money and be compensated for driving a vehicle, because in many circumstances that personal injury protection becomes void when you receive that compensation. So that's just something to be aware of.
And we'll actually come on to talk about compensation later in the PowerPoint. So this case is Foster versus Houston General Insurance Company. It actually isn't an employee vehicle that they took because it was actually, they're transporting the students by walking them, but because 2 employees were in charge of that, it goes back onto the employees. So Robert Foster was a 17-year-old child who was intellectually disabled, and he was attending Morehouse Educational Development Center. At the time, he had been found to have the mental capacity of someone of 7 years and 4 months, which I felt was very specific. He was on the Special Olympics basketball team for the school, and it was a school-sanctioned activity, which is important to know. And then the problem was the school only had a dirt basketball court. So one of the coaches decided, hey, these kids deserve to play on an actual court before we go and play other people. So the two coaches had organized a field trip on December 2nd, 1977 to Dotson Park, which was only 3 blocks away from the school. They chose, because it was such a close distance, the coaches, who are Grant and Gray, decided to walk to the park instead of taking any type of bus transportation. At the time, they decided that they were going to go during lunch because that's when they had a good amount of time to walk over and come back. They had used these facilities before, but it was only for a picnic, and that was, I believe they took buses that time, but they decided they were going to walk just to cut down on the costs. And Grant was actually busy with the class, so Gray said the kids were getting too fidgety, so I'll go ahead and just take them all myself. So Gray and the whole team decided to walk together. He had told them stay in a packed group. But mind you, everybody had varying intellectual capacities, so how much that actually went through to everybody, and they were really excited. So 5 of them ran ahead, and they ran to the first road. So then after he told them to stop, do not cross the road until I get there. So then they all convened back together. And it was kind of just like an accordion. They all came back together, and then of course they go across the road, and what happens? They all spread out again. So this happened. They had to cross 2 roads, and they rejoined across the street. When they were crossing another street, Foster, who's a 17-year-old boy, ran ahead, and he ran into oncoming traffic, and he was eventually, there was 2 cars sitting, and then when he crossed over, he didn't realize this lane was still going, and he was hit on an ongoing vehicle, and he ended up dying 3 days later. Trial court found that Grant was negligent because of her failure to provide other transportation, her failure to supervise, her negligence, she was negligent in her choice of route to the park, and her failure to adequately instruct the students. So this is some stuff that we've actually talked about in this semester where it kind of ties in on transportation. Choosing your mode of transportation can come back on you in this way. And obviously this shows a failure to give proper instruction and a failure to provide a safe environment and to supervise. So this is kind of like an all-in-one. The defendants actually appealed. So the 2 coaches, Grant and Gray. And then the appellate court affirmed the decision. They're like, no, you're still wrong. Doesn't matter how many flaws were in that. But and they awarded $50,000 in favor of Foster. And the picture I put on the bottom just shows you, like, when you're walking in a pack, everybody's going to naturally separate and string out. So it's not like everybody's going to go in one place.
And now we're just going to cover some more points just about compensation and then guest statute, which is going to play a role in a few cases a little later. Guest statute just states that provides only liability for willful and wanton conduct when the injured party rode as a guest of the driver. So that's if, like me and one of my friends are going to be riding in a car together, he would be my guest, and in that situation I would really only be liable for willful and wanton conduct, which is doing something just obviously to harm someone, something like that. But it usually doesn't exist when a coach or a teacher is transporting students. In that case, they usually don't fit into that guest relationship, and then you are then can be liable for regular negligence. And in that case, it's a whole lot easier to be found liable for.
And we almost forgot. We should pull a number for that last case.
Should. Number 5.
It's only fair if everybody loses candy. Alrighty, so this case, McCurry versus the School District of Valley, it was a wrongful death action suit against a driver and a school district. This school had been taking students to go ski every year, and in this year, due to large interest, they decided that they were going to go with the charter bus plus additional transportation. So it's important to know that in this case, the driver of the van was actually not a school employee. It was just a parent of a student that attended. The driver had an 8-passenger van, but he was actually assigned 9 passengers. So he obviously overloaded that vehicle. And he actually had no say, aside from his daughter, in who would be riding with him on the trip. That's important. We'll come back to that later. Now, the day that they decided to leave, they decided to let the driver of the van to leave 2 hours earlier than the bus, because they assumed the bus would go straight on through, but the van would have to take stops. And so they would give them a 2-hour head start to go ahead and go. Now, the driver had worked that day until 4 p.m., and they said that he only had a couple hours of sleep the night before. And the plan was to drive from 7 p.m. to 8:30 a.m., where they would arrive at their destination. During the drive, the driver reported that he saw some slick spots, like some ice, and that the wind was really windy that night. The wind was windy. But he said in order to compensate for that, he dropped the van down to be going at 50 miles an hour, and he applied cruise control to maintain that. However, well, we'll get that's it. The car was involved in a single-car accident. The riders said, most of them were asleep at the time, that it felt like someone had just pushed the van over. The van was flipped on its side, and they evacuated everyone out through a broken windshield. And when they got out, they realized they only had 8 people, and they were looking for the last one, which they saw was pinned under the van. And there's a lot, with this case, it's a lot of he said, she said. So initially, the driver said he kicked out the window, and he was the one that did it. But then the other adult, who was a teacher, said that he or she did it. So there's like a lot of, that's what I'm saying, with the driver reports and what the students report and the other passengers is really important. So these are the statements by the passengers and the state trooper. The state trooper said that there was no ice on that road, and there was absolutely no wind that night. The driver, or the person who was the teacher who was riding with him, had said that the driver had been using cruise control to accelerate, and he had been sitting on his own leg while he was driving, so he wasn't using or had both feet down. The state trooper said that there were no skid marks on the road or the median, and that's really important because the driver had said that he had been pushed and then he tried to overcorrect the van because of the wind and the ice, and that wouldn't be the case if there was no skid marks, obviously. A student had reported that he heard the driver and the student talking beforehand. However, another student said that they heard nothing until they heard the screech of the tires and them flip over. Now, the state trooper had decided, with all these facts in mind, that the driver had fallen asleep. In trial court, the plaintiffs alleged that the school district negligently entrusted a driver, and therefore they were negligent of the operation of the van. So they were negligent for all the things that the driver did during this road trip. The driver and the school district entered in a covenant to not sue, and they agreed to pay the students that, or the plaintiffs, $95,000 before they ever went to court. The district was also responsible to pay for some of the damages, and then the district filed for and was granted summary judgment to dismiss the case. But then the plaintiffs appealed because they said that this doesn't qualify for summary judgment. So at the Supreme Court, they agreed that the trial court was correct in ruling that the plaintiffs showed how the district negligently allowed the driver to transport the students, but they concluded that the driver was actually fulfilling the wants of the school. So the driver had no other investment in driving the 600 miles to the ski resort, aside from the fact that his daughter was the one that was going. While the gas, expenses, and lodging were being paid for by the school, the driver was not actually given a fee or any type of monetary exchange for the fact that he was driving, that he was just getting reimbursed for his costs. Therefore, it was decided that the driver was not actually an agent of the school district. So that was not an appropriate issue for summary judgment. So the Supreme Court affirmed with dissent. Did I say that right? Dissent, thank you. With the summary judgment awarded by the lower court. So, and then the one big thing is that even though they had the student that died, and this was actually, they had a little note at the bottom that a lot of people didn't like the outcome of this case. This case proved that you had to have someone who was an appropriate driver. They also proved that you had to maintain the maintenance of your own vehicle and not overload the other vehicle. So this was like a precedent case for other cases that are out there.
And next we'll kind of get into the private vehicles. This is when a volunteer decides to drive. This would be going on a field trip. Timmy's mom's like, well, Timmy's going. I'll drive my minivan, load all the kids up in there and we'll go. In this situation, you're really considered to be contracting blind because you don't really know the person that you're hiring or that you're allowing to drive these kids. You don't know if they're a good driver, if they speed all the time. You don't know if they have insurance. You don't know if their car works very well. And so there's just a lot of stuff that goes into that you can't really be sure of. And so in these situations, you still have to think about the personal injury protection, the guest statutes that we talked about before, and then reimbursement as far as compensating a driver. And then just some things that if you're able to and if you want to take this route to transport your kids, just some things that you really need to make sure you check out first is just to see if the driver does have an appropriate insurance policy, if they are covered, to then evaluate the condition of the vehicle, check the tires, check the lights, that kind of stuff. Also, inquire about their driving history. Don't overload the vehicle, and then just make sure that there is some kind of emergency equipment available. If you are going to take this route to try to lessen your liability, you need to make sure these areas are covered, just to kind of cover your own butt, really.
And the emergency supplies, that's all inclusive as far as like a first aid kit, road flares, the reflective triangles, pretty much anything that could go wrong maintenance-wise for the vehicle or for the passengers. So the next case we're going to talk about is Myrick's versus the Linwood Unified School District. The Running Rebels served as a summer prep team for the Lady Knights, which is a high school team. Now, the California Interscholastic Federation bans high school coaches from doing any type of basketball coaching after the high school season is over until the season begins. So you can't coach all the way through and prep your kids coming through. However, this school did that. And in fact, they did it to the fact where the CIF, yeah, that's right, they found out about it and they fired the head coach. Then they replaced the head coach with the assistant coach, and that's the man who we're going to talk about today. His name is Barfield. Now, he actually just assumed the same position. So he still allowed this Running Rebels to be kind of a prep team for the Lady Knights. And in order to fund some traveling, coming back to this, it's going to be important later because we talk about an exchange of money. He solicited the city council for $10,000 to help pay for this giant summer trip that they were going to take to Arizona, Nevada, in California to go ahead and play in basketball tournaments. And he was awarded that money from the city council. Now, Barfield didn't have a valid California driver's license, so he used his mom's credit card to go ahead and rent 2 vans. And even though he didn't have a valid driver's license, he still did a majority of the driving. The other person that was driving was his assistant coach, and her name is Michelle Allen. Now, the trip lasted from July 2nd through this July 23rd date when they actually got into a car accident because Michelle Allen fell asleep on the road and crashed one of the vans. And subsequently, she killed one of her athletes that was in the van with her. Now, in the report, it said that Coach Allen had told Coach Barfield that she was getting tired, and multiple times they had stopped before this final incident. Now, what makes this a sticky situation is that they couldn't decide whether or not that this was a school function or a non-school function because the Running Rebels kind of coincide with the Lady Knights. In fact, a couple of the parents, when they were signing the consent forms, when it says write team name here, instead of writing Running Rebels, they actually wrote Lady Knights. Then the other issue is that the coach was actually paid by the district, so he was receiving a district paycheck, as well as the assistant coach who's working for the Parks and Recs department. So she was also getting paid for through the county and through the city. Also, the city donated the $10,000 for them to go ahead and travel. There was also 2 players who were in summer school at the time, and this is a substantial amount of time. They're essentially missing a month of school. But the principal of the school said, hey, if you do these assignments now and then you fax in the rest while you guys are on the road, you guys can go ahead and miss that time. So they had a hard time just figuring out whether or not this was a real school function or not a school function. So in trial court, they entered summary judgment for the district and the city, and then the plaintiffs appealed. And in the appellate court, they decided that the trip was not actually a school-sponsored trip while they got the principal's permission to go, and while they got money funded through the city and the district, it was still technically a voluntary trip because it's an outside team. So despite the district and city involvement, they affirmed the summary judgment for the city and the district.
All right, so now we're just going to talk about driver responsibilities. So if you are going to be driving a vehicle, you want to make sure that you have the proper license. That could just be normal driver's license, and in some states, as we said, you have to have a chauffeur's license, and that could be for anything as far as, a 15-passenger van sometimes qualifies to need that chauffeur's license. Next is just be in condition to drive. Make sure that you are well rested, that you're not tired, you're not sleepy, that you're not angry, that you're fighting with someone, anything like that. That could change your decision making or change your mood in that situation. Next, just check the vehicle before you drive. That comes as far as tire tread, to see that the tires are where they need to be. That check headlights, taillights, blinkers. Check to make sure that your windshield wipers work. Check to make sure that you have emergency equipment, that you have a spare tire, that you have road flares, the little emergency triangle, all that kind of stuff. You need to make sure that you're checking that kind of stuff. Make sure that you have insurance on the vehicle that you're driving and then on the driver themselves. And also just to supervise your passengers. In many circumstances, on school buses, on small vans, a lot of times the driver is the only adult there. So then you also have the responsibility to also drive the van as well as supervise the passengers. So, and we'll cover a few cases to talk about those. This next case is just White versus United States of America. In this case, Roland and...
Pretty official title.
Yeah. Roland and Roland, they're little twins, are riding in a bus home from school. Roland fell asleep. I'm sure that Roland was just kind of doing his own thing. Roland, she felt the ride kind of get bumpy. It woke her up. The next thing she knew, she was laying on the floor. She was hurt. She didn't know what happened. Apparently, the driver had blacked out. The bus left the road, hit a culvert, hit some trees, and then crashed. And then the trial court decision was in favor of the plaintiffs for about $3 million. And the reason that the driver and ultimately the United States of America was found liable for this is because the school that the students attended was on an Indian reserve, and so that was funded by the federal government. So this driver was then a federal employee paid by the federal government, and so that's why the government is the ultimate authority here. And the reason that the driver ended up being liable just for, you think blacking out, it could happen to anyone. But this goes back to driver condition. This driver had a history of diabetes, headaches, blurry vision at times. He actually had spells where he was blacked out before. His employers actually knew about this. He knew about this. There are medical records to back this up. And they're saying that he should not have been allowed to drive because of this situation and because it was very unpredictable. And so that's why he was left liable for that one. All right, next is just Blair versus the Board of Education of Sherburne. This is in New York in 1982. There's a bus full of kids that are on their way home. Students are horse playing. They're throwing stuff around the bus. Goes on for about 15 minutes. The bus driver doesn't really do anything about it, just trucking on down the road. And Bobby, he was struck in the eye. Something flew across the bus, hit him in the eye, and he was actually left with a serious permanent eye injury. Don't know if that means he was left blind. I don't know exactly what that means. But so in this case, the courts decided that the driver had the dual responsibility to both drive the bus and also supervise the students. And because he was negligent in his supervision, that's what caused the injury to occur. In this case, they decided for the plaintiff. And so something else just to be thinking about, in this situation, the driver is obviously the only adult on the bus. If you think about sports teams, and you think about athletes, there's usually a driver, which sometimes is a coach, sometimes is a district employee. Then you also have the coaches on the bus. And so you just need to keep in mind that even though in this case the driver was responsible for supervision, it would be very ill-advised to think that if there are other adults on the bus, that they're not liable for supervision. In that case, if there are multiple adults on the bus, those other adults should assume the duty to supervise the bus and let the driver assume responsibility only for driving. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're on your way back from a big win, kids get kind of worked up. Just kind of be aware that it's not just the driver's responsibility to keep the kids in line. So next, we're just going to wrap it up with just some implications to be thinking about, to keep in mind when you are transporting athletes. Is just the best bet is to use a chartered vehicle if you can. I know a lot of schools can't really afford that, so your next best bet is to use a district vehicle, preferably a school bus. But if you have to use a van, just make sure that you're checking the tires, you're checking to make sure it's properly maintained before you use it. Don't overload the vehicle. In any case, it's just you're better off to get two vehicles than to try to squeeze an extra person into a seat that it's not made for. Make sure that all your passengers wear a seatbelt if they're available. If you're in a van, make sure everybody's buckling up. School bus, it's not really possible with most of them. Most of them don't have the seatbelts, but if they do, make sure that those are used. You want to make sure that you're inspecting the vehicle before you drive it. And then if you do see that there's something that needs to be looked at, don't drive it until it's fixed. Report it to whoever is in charge of maintaining the vehicle as far as getting new tires, lights, stuff like that. And don't drive a vehicle if it needs to be looked at. Never allow students or athletes to drive, even in the situation of a college when the kids and the athletes are obviously old enough to drive, and even in high schools when they're old enough to drive, they should never be allowed to transport athletes for a team function or a school function. Make sure you're always providing the supervision, like we talked about. Go to the next one. Make sure that you have the proper insurance, that you're covering yourself on those bases, and make sure you have the proper license, whether it's just a regular driver's license or chauffeur's license or commercial license, depending on what vehicle you're using. And then just make sure you're in a condition that allows you to be a good driver.
All right, now I need you guys to split up into 3 groups. Kind of make eye contact with your compadres who you want to be in your groups, and then get near them so you guys can all be a team together because you have to discuss for your questions. So group up. You have 5 seconds. I don't know that you can really move, but because now it's time for cash cab. So
this is real.
This is real. So where's one of my teams? 1, 2, 3. Then you guys are a team, and then I guess this whole L shape here is a team.
Got a big team.
Okay, so they have a big team. So that'll be team 1, team 2, team 3. Yep. Now you're trying to get to your destination, which is 20 blocks away, but you have to answer 4 questions to get there. All right. Each team has 4 questions. Whoever gets all 4 questions right, and if there's a tie, we have tiebreaker cards, gets the entire box of candy to which we've been contributing all night. All right? Okay.
If you win, you get the whole box.
Yeah, your team gets the whole box of candy. You can distribute it how you wish.
So, Christy wanted to make sure her team wins so she gets her candy back.
Absolutely. She's down none. All right, so team 1, your first question.
Team 1, question 1. We ready?
Sure.
Team 1. All right. What are the best maintained vehicles in a district fleet?
Going with bus. All right, you made it to your first 5-block mark. Boop. We had magnets that we were going to move down as you guys made them, but they didn't stick. All righty, team 2, your question. Some states will require you to get an additional license to operate a large van. What type of license is this? Chauffeurs. We'll go ahead and give that to you. You get your 5 block.
Yeah, I heard more chauffeurs than I heard.
Yeah, but that's the Eugene School District. They have the.
2 out of 3 people said chauffeur.
Then I heard Rachel say chauffeurs, and Chrissy said chauffeurs, and then she said van certification.
All right, team 3, are we ready? All right. All right, listen up. You have a Toyota Corolla that seats 5 people, including yourself. However, you have 5 students plus yourself that you need to get to a speech tournament. There's no other persons available to help you transport these kids. If you transport 6 people, what is your biggest legal concern?
Assume you're taking one. Overloading the vehicle. All right, team number 1. What coverage is important to include on your insurance policy? No, you guys can't look at your notes. I'm sorry.
Come on.
You can use them if you want to use a note shout out, but that's it. What does the PIP stand for? There you go. You guys made it to your second block.
All right. Team 2, are you ready? You remember, what is the guest statute? The guest statute.
Something about willful and wanton misconduct if it's gift. Because it's your friend.
Yeah.
So you're only liable if it's willful and wanton. If you do something reckless,
Okay. Now, would a student or athlete fit into that guest? No. Okay.
All right. Nice job. All right, team 3. Which mode of transportation has the least liability? Independent contractors. That's correct.
Okay. Who are we at? Team
1.
Team 1?
Team 1 going to
You ready?
block 15.
We're going for block 15.
Yep.
Name 1 driver responsibility. That'll work.
Have a proper driver's license. That'll go. All right, team 2. Name 2 things that you should check before driving a vehicle.
tire pressure and the last time it was serviced.
We'll go ahead and give you that one. That'll work. Tires
In service.
and the last time it was serviced.
Service is oil and rotation. And it's only rotation. So I just named 3. Oil, rotation.
All right, Team 3, we ready? Okay. Now, what might happen if a driver receives some form of monetary compensation for their driving and there's an accident, as far as insurance is concerned, maybe? Yeah, your PIP can sometimes become void.
Here's your marker. Alrighty, team 3. I feel like I picked up the wrong cards. You took team 3's cards.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, everything shifted over. Oh, doo-doo. We just did team 3? My bad. I'm like all confused. All right, team 1. What mode of transportation has the greatest liability? What mode of transportation has the greatest liability? Private vehicles driven by volunteers. Woo! But if everybody makes it, y'all got to make your tiebreaker question. You guys are the first to go.
Questionable answers.
Yes.
I think we've already asked those. Where are we at? We're at
We're team 2.
Okay. So they said a driver responsibility is to have a proper license. What's another responsibility a driver must consider? Something else a driver is responsible for. Yeah, just making sure the vehicle is properly maintained.
We need to be a little more specific on that answer.
Thanks for playing Jeopardy.
We need some more specificity on that one. What is
That one. All right. Team 3. What is the least maintained vehicle in a district's fleet? Vans, that's right. So in the event of a three-way tie...
we win.
Okay, Team 1, you ready for your tiebreaker question? You ready? Okay. In the McCurry versus School District of Valley, the driver of the van was reimbursed for gas, lodging, and expenses. Was he an agent of the school district? Why not?
Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't paid through the school. He wasn't like compensated for it for
There we
driving
go.
itself.
Correct.
Well
Nice
done.
job, Team 1. Team 2, are you ready?
We're ready.
In the case, you guys can't do a note shout out on this one, by the way. In the case of Clement versus Griffin, the 10 students sued 4 defendants. Name all 4 defendants.
Ford, Goodyear, the school, and the student driver.
Nice job.
Well done.
Wait.
All right.
No, we have a solution, though.
Okay, you ready, Team 3? All right. In Laffey versus the Joint School District Number 2, City of Cumberland, a school hired a charter bus to go to a basketball tournament in another city. Why didn't the school district get in trouble? Accident was caused. They were not found liable. Why were they not found liable? Yeah. Okay, in the Laffey versus the Joint School District, a school hired a charter bus to take a basketball team from one city to another. Why were they not considered liable for the accident? I haven't really heard an answer yet.
By hiring a charter vehicle, comes an independent contractor, they took over the liability of
Yeah.
the school.
There we go.
All right, so in the event of a three-way tie, everybody who lost candy gets to reclaim their own candy. So we'll pass the box around. But do we have any questions as far as any of the cases we presented?
Oh, I just have one,
Yeah.
maybe if you know it or not, because that one that you said about the bus driver who was on the vehicle, but the kid was acting up and one got hit and got sued.
Yeah.
Do you know if that had something to do with them eventually going to bus monitors on buses because of that? Because bus drivers having to do dual duty as bus driver and controlling the kids. They said you as a bus driver complain, I can't do both.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a case that caused that to happen, but I bet it definitely supported the school district to start doing that. Yeah.
But I know when I graduated from school, we didn't have bus monitors on
Yeah.
buses. Kids were free rolling in the back of the bus and stuff.
Yeah.
I know now they have